They mocked her every single day. Just a quiet woman in a khaki uniform, mopping the floors while officers marched past, never once looking her way. At Fort Kirstson Military Intelligence Base, she was invisible. Background noise. Nothing more. Until the day everything changed. A cocky young lieutenant waved a sealed classified document in her face, grinning while his buddies chuckled behind him. "If you can translate this," he said with a smirk, "my rank's yours." He expected her to freeze, to stumble, to laugh it off. Instead, she spoke, calm, clear, and word perfect in a language so rare that only the highest level intelligence officers were even cleared to hear it. The room went still. The broom she'd left leaning against the wall stood there alone now. No one ever called her a janitor again, and no one ever laughed in her direction after that. "Tell us, what city in the world are you watching from?" If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got more true, haunting stories on the way, each one more unforgettable than the last. Your support keeps this channel alive. It means everything. The pale morning light barely filtered through the reinforced windows of Fort Kirstson. Military Intelligence Base as Claire, Monroe began her shift. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tucked neatly beneath a plain cap. Her shoulders were slightly stooped, eyes lowered, yet there was something unusual in her presence. A quiet alertness, always listening. As she pushed her broom down the corridor, her motions were smooth and exact, mechanical in their precision, almost like muscle memory from another life. The scent of floor polish, mixed with the bite of military-grade coffee, thickened the air. Her uniform, simple khaki, blended seamlessly into the concrete gray walls. She could have been a part of the building itself. Officers passed her like she didn't exist. Analysts brushed by without so much as a nod. Colonel Hayes moved quickly with his team, discussing deployment logistics. He didn't break stride as he passed her, never once acknowledging the woman. 2 feet from his boots, like she was just part of the scenery. Major Wilson clipped the edge of her janitorial cart. No glance, no apology, just kept walking, eyes locked on his phone. Claire had blended in so well for so long that she'd become part of the architecture. Not a person, a shadow, a fixture. The kind no one notices until it moves. On the wall near the east corridor, someone had posted a grainy image from Operation Swift Response. Below it, a coffee cup had toppled, dark liquid, now bleeding through the grout lines between the tiles. Claire knelt beside it wordlessly, pulling a cloth from her pocket with the kind of instinct that came from long repetition. No hesitation. No drama, just work. She knew, once coffee dried on these floors, it never came out clean again. "Watch where you're going!" Lieutenant Wexford barked as he passed, then deliberately stepped through the wet area, leaving a trail of muddy boot prints behind. Claire didn't react. She just kept scrubbing. But she didn't miss the direction he was heading, or what he was carrying under his arm. He was just 29, the youngest lieutenant on base, and never missed a chance to remind others how quickly he'd climbed the ranks. 2 junior analysts followed close behind, chuckling. One of them mimicked Claire Monroe's slow, deliberate gait, slouching like a cartoonish caricature, unaware that she could see everything. "She probably doesn't even know what building she's in," one of them muttered, just loud enough to carry. "Bet she thinks those satellite feeds are paintings," the other laughed. Claire said nothing. Her hands continued their steady rhythm across the floor. Her expression never shifted. But for a heartbeat, something sharp flickered in her eyes. Then just as quickly it vanished. As she approached a secure room, she paused subtly, just long enough to observe the officer at the keypad. 6 digits. Entered fluidly. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. But somewhere behind her quiet gaze, the code was logged perfectly. Later, outside the classified records room, she was emptying a trash bin when a loose document slipped from an analyst's folder. There was the briefest tightening around her mouth. A flicker of recognition, but without missing a beat, she bent, picked up the page, and handed it back without a word. No one looked twice, and no one realized what she'd seen. "Thank you," the analyst said casually, like he was noticing her for the very first time. The base pressed on with its routine. Briefings unfolded behind closed doors, shifts turned over without pause, and the endless hum of military intelligence operations filled the air. And through it all, Claire Monroe moved like a shadow, always present, yet effortlessly ignored. She heard everything, yet gave the impression of hearing nothing at all. By mid-morning, she was cleaning the floors inside the communications wing, where rows of specialists monitored global transmissions in real time. Two officers stood at a console, voices hushed but edged with urgency. "The subtle tonal shifts are disappearing," one said quietly. Headquarters warned us even the smallest inflection could change the entire meaning of the message. Claire didn't react. She never did, but her ears didn't miss a word. Claire's broom slowed, just slightly as she moved around the edge of their workstation. But her head stayed down, her motions quiet and steady. "If you're going to eavesdrop," one of the specialists snapped, "at least have the decency to do it properly. This is classified." Claire stepped back without a word, but a faint glimmer crossed her eyes. Something dry, almost playful. Near the training wing, a group of fresh recruits sat through a security protocol lecture. The instructor, Sergeant Blake, paused mid-sentence when he noticed. Claire entered the adjacent restroom to clean. "When support staff is present, keep your voices low," he warned the recruits. "Whether they understand you or not, it's still protocol." Claire disappeared behind the door. It clicked shut softly. It was the first time all morning she'd truly been alone. She set her supplies down, walked slowly to the mirror, and looked at herself. Really looked. For a few quiet seconds, everything shifted. Her spine straightened. Her shoulders squared. Her chin rose. And in her eyes, clarity, focus, fire. Then came footsteps outside. Just like that, she lowered her head, picked up the tools, and melted back into her role, silent, steady, unseen. By noon, she'd made her way to the officers' mess hall. The wide, polished room hummed with voices, boots, and the muted clatter of trays. Officers socializing between shifts, unaware of the woman moving along the walls. Claire Monroe worked the perimeter with quiet efficiency, emptying bins, wiping down tables recently vacated, blending into the routine like a shadow against the floor. Captain Hayes' voice cut above the ambient noise. At 35, he led a specialized intelligence unit that had been stretched thin for months. "Headquarters wants miracles, apparently," he muttered to the officers beside him. "We still haven't found anyone fluent in both. Posto and Northern Dari, the translator they sent last week, couldn't even spot the dialect. Completely useless for the kind of intercepts we're seeing." Claire moved in near their table, lifting a bin with calm precision, her hand slowing just slightly. Only someone truly observant would have noticed. "In the Bad Region dialect," Hayes went on, "there are phonetic shifts so subtle most people miss them. If a translator can't catch those, we're throwing good intel in the trash." Lieutenant Wexford, seated across from Hayes, glanced up and locked eyes with Claire. He noticed the slight pause. The proximity, and something about her expression unsettled him. "Hey, Miss Mop!" he barked suddenly, his voice slicing through the mess hall like a sharp edge. Everything stopped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Forks frozen halfway to mouths. Claire froze, trash bag in hand. Wexford leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I asked you a question," he said, clearly performing now. "Are those ears just for decoration? Or do you actually understand what we're talking about?" Claire Monroe remained silent, her gaze lowered. "Let it go, Wexford," Captain Hayes said, his tone edged with annoyance. "She's just doing her job." "Is she really?" Wexford lifted an eyebrow. "I've been watching her for days, always, lurking near the sensitive conversations, always listening." He rose from his seat and strolled toward her slowly, a mocking grin tugging at his mouth, drawing the full attention of the room. Claire took a step back. Her grip on the trash bag tightened. "What's your clearance level, Mop Lady?" Wexford said loudly. "Do you even speak English, or is clean this? Clean that where your genius maxes out?" A few chuckles spread through the mess hall. Others just looked down, uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. Wexford's grin widened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page, a printed excerpt from one of his rare dialect training modules. "Since you're so fascinated with our conversations," he said, waving the paper like a stage prop, "why not take the floor?" He held the page out with exaggerated flair. "Translate this, and my rank is yours." The room crackled with anticipation. A ripple of laughter spread among the officers. They had gathered now in a loose, tightening circle, Claire standing alone beneath the sterile overhead lights. Someone muttered just loud enough to be heard, "This ought to be good." And that's when Colonel Bennett stepped into the mess hall, silver-haired, ramrod straight, eyes sharp as glass. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene without a word. No one had noticed him yet. Every eye was still locked on Claire. Monroe and the quiet storm building behind her gaze. Something shifted in Claire Monroe's posture, so subtle, only the most trained eye might have noticed. Her shoulders squared just slightly. Her hands, worn by time but calloused in ways no ordinary janitors ever were, clenched tighter around the trash bag. "What's the matter? Too tough for you?" Wexford taunted, his voice soaked in mockery, riding the wave of attention from the crowd. "Or maybe you'd rather crawl back to your mop. Stop acting like any of this is your world." Claire paused. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, then locked briefly onto Colonel Bennett, who stood like a statue, his expression carved from stone, observing in silence. Wexford slapped the folded sheet onto a freshly cleaned table. "Go on, read it." Or is even that too much? The mess hall was dead silent. Every set of eyes watched the quiet woman in khaki and the grinning lieutenant trying to make a spectacle of her. Colonel Bennett still hadn't moved. No interruption. No rescue. Claire looked down at the paper, then up at Wexford, then finally at Bennett. The air stretched tight with anticipation. Then slowly and deliberately she set the trash bag down, not a tremor in her fingers. And as she stepped forward, the entire room seemed to lean in, watching every move she made. Claire Monroe picked up the document calmly, steadily. She studied it for a few moments, giving away nothing in her expression. The silence in the mess hall grew heavier, breath held across the room. Then, without a hint of hesitation and with flawless precision, she began to translate, not just the words. She captured the tone, the military-specific phrasing, and the layered idioms unique to that region's dialect, with the kind of fluency that didn't come from training. It came from memory. Her voice, soft-spoken until now, rose with quiet clarity, carrying through the room. Measured, steady, unmistakably authoritative. "This intelligence is nearly 3 weeks old," she said as she concluded, eyes still on the page. The location was already compromised as of April 12th. And then she kept going, slipping effortlessly into the Northern Dari dialect, weaving in high-level, operational language no ordinary janitor could have even identified, let alone spoken. Her pronunciation? Impeccable. Her accent native, as if she'd been born speaking it. Wexford's grin vanished. The blood drained from his face. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. "That's enough, Monroe." Colonel Merritt's voice sliced through the silence as he stepped forward from the doorway. Claire didn't flinch. She responded with a precise code phrase, and recognition flashed instantly in Merritt's eyes. His entire bearing shifted, back straight, chin up, military precision locked into place. "Commander Monroe," he declared, loud and clear. Gasps rippled through the room. The same officers who'd been chuckling moments ago now froze, standing ramrod straight, confusion and disbelief etched on their faces. "Sir," Claire replied, her tone crisp, formal. Something in her posture changed. The air around her sharpened. Gone was the quiet janitor. In her place stood a commanding presence, unshakable. Wexford's eyes darted between them, disoriented, pale. Colonel Merritt raised a hand. The mess hall fell into stunned silence. "The woman before you," he said slowly, "is Commander Claire Monroe, a covert embedded asset with over 2 decades of deep field operations. She saved 43 personnel during Operation Nightshade." Claire removed her cap. And then she stood at her full height. No trace of the quiet figure who had swept floors and emptied trash. Only the presence of a senior officer the entire base had failed to recognize. "This," Merritt said quietly, "is the woman you've all ignored," Colonel Bennett said. "She's the one who designed that cipher system, Lieutenant. The same system you just handed to her. The same one you're still struggling to master in your advanced training." Lieutenant Wexford opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize. But Claire Monroe silenced him with a single raised hand. She handed the document back, its margins now marked with corrections for 3 intelligence errors. "Appearing insignificant is a tactical decision," Claire said, addressing the entire hall, her voice calm yet resonating across the room. "Remember this, before you offer respect, ask yourself who you never even tried to understand." The mess hall remained silent. Colonel Bennett gestured toward the door. "Miss Monroe, if you'll walk with me to my office." And just like that, they both exited, leaving behind a room full of stunned officers. Whispers erupted in their wake. Lieutenant Wexford remained frozen in place, still holding the same document, his face flushed red with shame and disbelief. In the corridor, Claire walked in perfect stride with Colonel Bennett, and not a trace remained of the woman who once stooped quietly through the halls. As they walked past the base personnel, several people stopped mid-step, doing double takes, unable to believe that the dignified figure walking beside the colonel was the same quiet woman they'd ignored for months. "Your cover was nearly perfect," Colonel Bennett said as they moved through the corridor. "There were moments I forgot myself what you were really doing here." "That was the point," Claire Monroe replied calmly. "When people think they're speaking in front of a broom or a chair, they drop their guard. They say things they shouldn't, freely, carelessly." They reached Colonel Bennett's office, a spacious room lined with tactical maps on one wall and security feeds on the other. He closed the door and flipped a hidden switch beneath his desk. The hum of the air system shifted slightly. Privacy protocols were now active. "How much have you gathered?" he asked, dropping the formal tone at last. Claire reached under the loose folds of her janitor's uniform and retrieved a slim device, placing it carefully into the secure terminal at his desk. "Enough to narrow it down to 3 people," she said. "The leak is internal, and whoever it is has deep access." Lines of data flowed across the monitor. Access logs, communication timings, movement paths. It was the kind of intelligence only someone, overlooked by everyone, could have collected so thoroughly. Captain Hayes, Lieutenant Wexford, or one other, an analyst whose clearance doesn't match his file trail. Claire tapped the screen, highlighting all 3 profiles. Each of them accessed restricted files during suspicious windows. Each one has communications gaps that don't line up, and each has shown a pattern, subtle, but repeating, of behavior that doesn't fit their role. Colonel Bennett leaned forward, scanning the incoming intel with a hardened gaze. "Hayes has been with us for a decade. Wexford's up for a critical promotion." He didn't say the third name aloud, but Claire could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just a breach. This was betrayal from inside the walls they both had trusted. "And Captain Hayes is leading our most delicate operation in the eastern sector," Claire Monroe said evenly. "If any of them turns out to be our mole, it would be a catastrophic breach. I need 1 more week to confirm." Just then, a knock came at the door. Colonel Bennett immediately switched off the monitor and called out, "Enter." Lieutenant Wexford stepped in, his posture rigidly formal, though it looked forced beside Claire Monroe's natural command. His eyes flicked between the two, still visibly grappling with the realization of who she really was. "Sir, I've come to formally apologize for my conduct," he said, voice tight. "To whom, Lieutenant?" Bennett asked directly. Wexford swallowed. "To Commander Monroe, sir." Claire studied him, her eyes quiet but cutting, as if she were reading a full confession in the lines of his face. "Apology noted, Lieutenant," she said, her tone even. "But what matters more is why you felt the need to challenge someone. You assumed had no power." A visible crack formed in Wexford's carefully controlled expression. "That wasn't my intention, Commander," he said, subdued. "But that's what you did," Claire replied calmly. "Not just to me, but to every person on this base, who wears a uniform you think isn't worth respecting. People who keep this place running. People you dismissed with a smirk." The young lieutenant had no answer. "Your behavior today may have compromised an ongoing intelligence operation," Colonel Bennett added, his tone sharp. "Commander Monroe has been working undercover for nearly a year to gather information on the security gap that has already cost several lives," Colonel Bennett said. "I had no idea, sir," Lieutenant Wexford replied. "That's the point of a covert mission." "Lieutenant," Claire Monroe said in a dry tone. Colonel Bennett turned to Claire Monroe. "What's your opinion, Commander?" "Disciplinary action?" Claire paused, then studied Wexford intently. "No, I think the lieutenant could be more useful in another role." She turned to the young officer, still standing uncomfortably. "Your language skills are strong, right? Was that why you felt the need to challenge me with that document?" "Yes, Commander. I'm fluent in 4 languages, can communicate in 3 more, and my observational skills are sharp enough that I noticed you paying attention to sensitive conversations, though I misread the meaning of your interest." Wexford responded uneasily. "So maybe you could be more useful on my mission, instead of facing disciplinary action," Claire Monroe concluded. "Sometimes, the true value of looking beyond rank and appearance only becomes clear once you experience it firsthand." Colonel Bennett raised an eyebrow. "After everything that's just happened, you want to include him in a covert counterintelligence operation? Sometimes, the most valuable lesson is seeing the full consequences of one's actions," Claire Monroe replied. "Besides, his security clearance is sufficient, and his language skills could be useful for the transcripts I've gathered." Lieutenant Wexford straightened in surprise.
You're giving me the opportunity
To join your operation instead of taking disciplinary action? Don't mistake this for leniency, Lieutenant, Claire Monroe warned. This is simply a decision to give a potentially useful asset a chance. Despite his flaws, it's up to you whether you can overcome those flaws. Colonel Bennett thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, Lieutenant Wexford. You're immediately assigned under Commander Monroe's command. You will follow every order she gives, regardless of how it's presented. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Wexford replied, his face a mixture of relief and unease. Report to briefing room number 3 in 30 minutes, Claire Monroe ordered. Wear civilian clothes, no rank insignia. And, Lieutenant, if you so much as mention a word of this operation,
to anyone, even in your sleep, today's
embarrassment will seem like a pleasant memory. After Wexford left, Colonel Bennett turned to Claire Monroe. Are you really confident in this decision? He's young, emotional, and just made a poor choice. Claire Monroe nodded in agreement. Sometimes, the ones who need to learn the most are the ones who need to be shown what happens behind the scenes. Besides, keeping him close will help limit the damage caused by his actions. Lieutenant Wexford straightened in surprise.
You're giving me the opportunity
To join your operation instead of taking disciplinary action? Don't mistake this for leniency, Lieutenant, Claire Monroe warned. This is simply a decision to give a potentially useful asset a chance. Despite his flaws, it's up to you whether you can overcome those flaws. Colonel Bennett thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, Lieutenant Wexford. You're immediately assigned under Commander Monroe's command. You will follow every order she gives, regardless of how it's presented. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Wexford replied, his face a mixture of relief and unease. Report to briefing room number 3 in 30 minutes, Claire Monroe ordered. Wear civilian clothes, no rank insignia. And, Lieutenant, if you so much as mention a word of this operation,
to anyone, even in your sleep, today's
embarrassment will seem like a pleasant memory. After Wexford left, Colonel Bennett turned to Claire Monroe. Are you really confident in this decision? He's young, emotional, and just made a poor choice. Claire Monroe nodded in agreement. Sometimes, the ones who need to learn the most are the ones who need to be shown what happens behind the scenes. Besides, keeping him close will help limit the damage caused by his actions. Afternoon. Lieutenant Wexford entered. Briefing room 3 as instructed, dressed. In civilian clothes, without any rank insignia. He found Claire Monroe already there, also in civilian attire, but her presence was a far cry from the former janitor persona. She was inspecting files spread out on the table, her movements methodical, calm and precise. Sit down, she said without lifting her gaze. Wexford immediately took a seat. Before we begin, I want to make one thing absolutely clear, Claire Monroe said, finally looking directly at him for the first time. What you did today wasn't just an insult to me. It also showed that you failed to understand the real demands of intelligence work. Commander, I am truly sorry, Wexford began. I'm not interested in your apology, she cut him off. I'm interested in whether you can learn from this. In intelligence, things are rarely what they seem. A janitor could be a foreign agent. A general could be compromised. And a simple analyst could be the most valuable asset in the room. She placed a file in front of him. For 11 months, I've walked these corridors, observing everything without being noticed. I know who takes extra food from the mess hall, who enters the secure room without logging in, and who lets sensitive information slip, thinking the janitor won't understand. Wexford opened the file. Inside were months of observational reports, thorough and detailed. You gathered all this while you were just cleaning? I wasn't pretending to clean. I was actually cleaning, Claire Monroe explained. The best cover is the one where you're genuinely doing what you're expected to do. During that time, I identified patterns in intelligence, leaks leading to 3 compromised, operations and 7 lost lives. For the first time, Wexford's face showed a reflection of the gravity of the situation. And you think you know who's responsible? I've narrowed it down to 3 suspects. Your job will be to analyze their linguistic patterns and conversations, to identify inconsistencies that could reveal their methods of communication. She placed the transcripts, surveillance images, and access logs in front of him. I need someone with fresh eyes, someone who can see what I might have missed after months of practice. Wexford glanced at the material, then looked at Claire Monroe. You're handing me all of this, despite everything that happened? I don't trust you, she answered bluntly. but I do make use of available resources. You have skills that could truly be valuable if you can set aside your pre-existing notions and focus on the work. She moved toward a map on the wall, which displayed the base layout with specific areas highlighted. For the next phase of this operation, I will continue to maintain my cover as a janitor. You will work in that secure room and analyze all the material I bring for you. No one knows that you have been assigned this new responsibility. To everyone else, due to your behavior today, you are on administrative leave. And if anyone asks where I am, then you've got food poisoning, and you are reflecting on proper conduct with the base staff. A slight smile appeared on Claire Monroe's lips. Any questions? Lieutenant Wexford paused for a moment, then spoke. That document, the one I challenged you with today, not only did you translate it, but you also corrected it. How did you know there were mistakes in it? Because I actually wrote it 16 years ago, during Operation Sandstone, Claire Monroe replied. The document you had was a training version, deliberately containing errors so that those learning translation could have their skills assessed. Something you would have realized yourself if you had bothered to check the source code in the footnote of the document. Wexford immediately opened the document again and saw the minor code that he had overlooked. His face turned red with embarrassment. This is intelligence work, Lieutenant, Claire Monroe said. Details matter. Assumptions can kill. The moment you think you know everything, that's when you actually lose sight of what's happening right in front of you. She glanced at her watch. We'll start work tomorrow. Morning at 0600. I'll resume my cover, and you'll begin linguistic analysis of those communication messages to help us identify where the breach is coming from. In the meantime, go through these files. Lieutenant Wexford nodded in acknowledgement, now realizing that this lesson wasn't just about treating the staff with respect. It was about understanding the true nature of classified information, where nothing is as it seems, and the janitor they had been overlooking for months could, in fact, be the most dangerous person on the entire base. The next morning, right at 600 hours, Claire Monroe resumed her role as the silent janitor of Fort Kirstson. She was pushing her cleaning cart through the quiet hallways early in the morning. Head down, shoulders slouched, just like an ordinary janitor, someone no one had noticed or recognized for months.
The only difference now
Was that whispers followed her every time she passed. After the mess hall incident, news had spread quickly. The officers who used to walk past her as if she weren't even there. Now they stole furtive glances. Some would hesitate and give a small nod, unsure whether she was actually some high-ranking officer in disguise or just a janitor. In Secure Room 3, Lieutenant Wexford was thoroughly analyzing the communication records that Claire Monroe had gathered. He had been there since 0530, determined to prove his worth after yesterday's embarrassment. When the door opened, he looked up, startled. Claire Monroe walked in, still in her janitor uniform, carrying a trash bag which she emptied onto the table. From the bag came some crumpled papers, a discarded data drive, and a few handwritten notes. It's Major Denning's trash, she explained, putting on gloves. You'd be surprised at what people throw away when they think no one's looking. Wexford looked at the pile of trash with new eyes, almost as though its significance had changed. So you're collecting trash as evidence? And more, she replied calmly, starting to sort through the items methodically. Did you find anything specific in these records? Maybe. There's a strange writing style. In Captain Eskridge's communications, he repeats certain phrases that don't align with his usual writing. Like he's hiding secret messages and routine reports. Claire Monroe nodded in approval. Good grip. What about Vargas? Nothing clear yet, but his access logs show that he's been in the secure communication room at odd hours. He says he was finishing up work, but the timestamps don't match any scheduled projects. They both continued working in silence for a few minutes. Claire Monroe was carefully straightening out the crumpled papers, while Lieutenant Wexford continued analyzing the data patterns. The atmosphere between them had completely changed compared to the previous day. Wexford was now taking every word and observation from the Commander with complete seriousness. Why did you choose to be a janitor? Wexford finally asked, unable to control his curiosity. With your experience and skills, you could have taken any core position. Claire Monroe didn't lift her eyes from her work. Janitors have access to every part of the base. No one questions their presence. No one watches what they're doing. And most importantly, no one thinks twice before speaking in front of them. She flattened a particularly crumpled piece of paper. When's the last time you remember being cautious in front of maintenance staff? or ever thought that the janitor might understand those classified documents you carelessly tossed away? Wexford had no answer. The most effective intelligence is when people don't even know. They're being watched, Claire Monroe continued. And for that, the best position is the one where no one cares about you. The lieutenant remained silent for a while, trying to digest this new perspective. I never thought being invisible could be so powerful. Most people don't think about it. That's what makes it effective. She looked at her watch. I need to keep up my routine. The moment I break my schedule, our suspects might realize something has changed. Claire Monroe nodded in approval. Good grip. What about Vargas? Nothing clear yet, but his access logs show that he's been in the secure communication room at odd hours. He says he was finishing up work, but the timestamps don't match any scheduled projects. They both continued working in silence for a few minutes. Claire Monroe was carefully straightening out the crumpled papers, while Lieutenant Wexford continued analyzing the data patterns. The atmosphere between them had completely changed compared to the previous day. Wexford was now taking every word and observation from the Commander with complete seriousness. Why did you choose to be a janitor? Wexford finally asked, unable to control his curiosity. With your experience and skills, you could have taken any core position. Claire Monroe didn't lift her eyes from her work. Janitors have access to every part of the base. No one questions their presence. No one watches what they're doing. And most importantly, no one thinks twice before speaking in front of them. She flattened a particularly crumpled piece of paper. When's the last time you remember being cautious in front of maintenance staff? Or ever thought that the janitor might understand those classified documents you carelessly tossed away? Wexford had no answer. The most effective intelligence is when people don't even know. They're being watched, Claire Monroe continued. And for that, the best position is the one where no one cares about you. The lieutenant remained silent for a while, trying to digest this new perspective. I never thought being invisible could be so powerful. Most people don't think about it. That's what makes it effective. She looked at her watch. I need to keep up my routine. The moment I break my schedule, our suspects might realize something has changed. Claire Monroe nodded in approval. Good grip. What about Vargas? Nothing clear yet, but his access logs show that he's been in the secure communication room at odd hours. He says he was finishing up work, but the timestamps don't match any scheduled projects. They both continued working in silence for a few minutes. Claire Monroe was carefully straightening out the crumpled papers, while Lieutenant Wexford continued analyzing the data patterns. The atmosphere between them had completely changed compared to the previous day. Wexford was now taking every word and observation from the Commander with complete seriousness. Why did you choose to be a janitor? Wexford finally asked, unable to control his curiosity. With your experience and skills, you could have taken any core position. Claire Monroe didn't lift her eyes from her work. Janitors have access to every part of the base. No one questions their presence. No one watches what they're doing. And most importantly, no one thinks twice before speaking in front of them. She flattened a particularly crumpled piece of paper. When's the last time you remember being cautious in front of maintenance staff? Or ever thought that the janitor might understand those classified documents you carelessly tossed away? Wexford had no answer. The most effective intelligence is when people don't even know. They're being watched, Claire Monroe continued. And for that, the best position is the one where no one cares about you. The lieutenant remained silent for a while, trying to digest this new perspective. I never thought being invisible could be so powerful. Most people don't think about it. That's what makes it effective. She looked at her watch. I need to keep up my routine. The moment I break my schedule, our suspects might realize something has changed. As Claire Monroe moved closer to Major Dennings's door, he suddenly stepped out, almost colliding with her. Watch where you're going! He snapped, his voice sharp, but then faltered as he recognized her. A mix of confusion, embarrassment, and a flicker of concern crossed his face quickly. Commander, he muttered quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. I'm sorry about that, he added, a little flustered. Claire Monroe kept her gaze lowered, absorbed entirely in her role. No harm done, sir, she answered softly, a stark contrast to the commanding tone she had used in the mess hall. Dennings hesitated, uncertain, his eyes flicking between her and the hallway. Should I be worried about your presence? He asked, his voice laced with unease. She tilted her head slightly. meeting his gaze just briefly, but her expression gave nothing away. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Same as always." He nodded, still unsure, before walking away. He threw one last look over his shoulder, his discomfort palpable. Claire Monroe watched him go, her mind sharp. Was this guilt on his part? Or just the self-consciousness of someone who knows they've been under the radar for far too long? By noon, Claire Monroe had finished her usual rounds and returned to the secure room, where Lieutenant Wexford was reviewing the latest data. "Eskridge is clear," she reported without hesitation. "The unusual patterns I picked up were from the translation software he uses. He's been taking extra language courses to qualify for field operations during his off hours." Claire Monroe glanced over the data. "Impressive work." "What about the others?" Wexford asked, eager for more insight. "Vargas still raises red flags. His system access logs align with multiple confirmed leaks. And take a look at this. There's a recurring pattern in his messages," she replied, pointing to some innocuous phrases scattered throughout various reports. "You're making good progress," Claire Monroe acknowledged, studying his analysis further. "What about Denning?" "Nothing definitive yet," Wexford replied, "but his focus on the new security protocols for Sector 7 operations is definitely odd." Claire Monroe nodded thoughtfully. "I had a strange run-in with him not long ago. It seemed like my presence near his office made him more uncomfortable than usual." She pulled out her secure tablet and showed him the footage she'd managed to obtain. "Look at this," she said as the video played. "When certain topics come up during briefings, watch how he reacts. His body stiffens and he constantly adjusts his collar." Wexford studied the footage intently, eyes narrowing. "Subtle but consistent," he noted. "That could be a tell, but we need more to go on." Claire Monroe leaned forward. "Tonight I'll pay him a visit, during the midnight shift. You'll monitor his communications from here. If he's the leak, he'll make contact as soon as he realizes we're onto him." "Are you sure about this?" Wexford asked. "If he knows your real identity now, he could be expecting something like this." A faint smile crossed Claire Monroe's face. "That's why I'm not going as the cleaner tonight. I'll go in as myself. Sometimes the best way to remain undetected is to stand in plain sight." Later that evening, Colonel Merrick convened a special briefing with the senior staff. As he outlined the upcoming operations, he casually mentioned a new layer of security measures being implemented due to intelligence concerns. "We have reason to believe that some sensitive information has been compromised," he stated, carefully observing the reactions of those present. "Therefore, we're immediately tightening access protocols." In the back of the room, seemingly engrossed in cleaning windows, Claire Monroe remained vigilant, studying the three suspects in silence. Vargas kept his face neutral, giving away nothing. Eskridge appeared worried, though not overly shaken. But it was Major Dennings who stood out. His constant checking of his watch, paired with the rhythmic tapping of his foot, signaled something more. After the briefing, Claire Monroe stayed back, observing. Instead of heading back to his quarters, Dennings made a beeline for the communication center. Claire Monroe immediately contacted Wexford over the radio. "The target is heading for the comms center. Stay alert." Precisely at 2300 hours, Claire Monroe strode into the main administrative building, fully dressed in her officer's uniform, her commander's insignia unmistakable. The night duty officer jumped to attention as she approached. "Commander Monroe," he greeted, saluting her. "Ma'am, I didn't expect to see you in uniform tonight." "Special assignment," she replied curtly, her tone professional. "I need access to Major Denning's office." "Of course, Commander," the officer responded, leading the way without hesitation. As Claire Monroe approached the office, she could hear Wexford's voice crackling through the hidden earbuds in her ear. "Dennings just sent a secure message from the comm center terminal. I'm working on decrypting it now." Upon entering Denning's office, Claire Monroe wasted no time. She began sifting through his files and discreetly installed a small surveillance device under the desk. Years of experience in covert operations had honed her to be methodical and meticulous. She moved with the precision of someone who had never been there before. Then, Wexford's voice returned, but this time with more urgency. "I've decrypted part of the message. It's definitely a warning. It says the operation is compromised and immediate evacuation is needed." "What's the time?" Claire Monroe asked, her voice steady as she worked. "He set it for 0100 hours, Wexford responded. Claire Monroe glanced at her watch, calculating quickly. "About an hour left? Alert Colonel Merritt and activate Security Protocol Alpha immediately," Wexford instructed. "I'm heading to the communication center now." Claire Monroe slipped out of the office, nodding briefly at the duty officer on her way out. But instead of heading straight to the communications center, she pivoted toward the security office. Once inside, she quickly gained access to the base's monitoring systems. "Show me the details for all scheduled departures in the next 2 hours," she instructed the system operator. "Just one, ma'am. Andrew's supply transport scheduled for E-130. Who approved this?" Claire Monroe asked, her tone steady. The operator glanced at the screen. "Major Dennings, ma'am. It's a routine weekly supply run." Claire Monroe narrowed her eyes. "There's nothing routine about this. Lock down that transport immediately. No one boards without Colonel Merritt's direct authorization." She turned and made her way to the communication center. As she moved, she was informed that Wexford had already contacted Colonel Merritt, and security protocols were being quietly enacted across the base. Personnel were being reassigned, but no alarms had been triggered. Upon entering the communication center, Claire Monroe observed that it was nearly empty, with only essential staff on the night shift. Major Dennings was conspicuously absent. "Where's Major Dennings?" she asked. The duty communication officer glanced up. "He left about 10 minutes ago, ma'am. Said he was headed to the transport area to inspect some supplies for tomorrow's shipment." Without hesitation, Claire Monroe turned on her heels and headed swiftly toward the transport hangar at the other side of the base. As she neared, she noticed security personnel taking up positions, a sign of Colonel Merritt's silent alarm being acted upon. Inside the hangar, a transport aircraft was prepped for departure. Ground crew members were busy loading cargo and checking systems, and there, overseeing the operation, stood Major Dennings. Claire Monroe approached with confidence, her uniform and rank unmistakably visible. "Major Dennings!" He spun around, surprise flashing in his eyes before a professional smile quickly replaced it. "Commander Embry, this is me unexpected." "Really?" Claire Monroe asked, her voice calm yet sharp. "I thought you were expecting something like this. Someone noticing the leaking patterns, compromised operations, and the lives lost in the field." His expression remained neutral, but Thalia Monroe caught the subtle tension in his jaw. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Commander," he said. "I think you do," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "Just as I think you know exactly what's in crate 17 that's being loaded right now. The one that's not on the manifest." A flash of genuine alarm crossed his face before he quickly masked it. "There's no crate 17, he said, his tone flat. "There is," she countered. "And inside it are copies of everything you've been feeding to your contact for the past 8 months. His eyes widened for a moment, but she pressed on. "We have the decryption keys to your communications. Major, we have your surveillance footage. And most importantly, we have your contact in custody as of 20 minutes ago." This last part was a bluff, but Major Dennings wouldn't know that. She watched as his composure finally cracked, his gaze darting toward the exit. "Don't!" she warned, her voice low and steady. "The entire base is locked down. There's nowhere to go." Security personnel were moving into position around them, closing off all possible exits. Colonel Merrick entered the hangar, Lieutenant Wexford at his side. "It's over, Major," Merrick stated firmly. "Surrender your sidearm and credentials." For a moment it seemed Dennings might resist, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Slowly he removed his weapon and handed it over. As security officers took him into custody, Wexford approached Thalia Monroe. "How did you know it was him?" "Multiple factors," she replied. "His access patterns, his reaction to my presence, but mostly his trash." "His trash?" Wexford echoed, incredulous. She nodded. "He was too careful with digital communications, but careless with physical evidence. The notes he burned weren't fully destroyed. When reassembled, they revealed meeting coordinates that aligned with known intelligence breaches." Wexford shook his head in disbelief. All this time, the answer was literally in the garbage. "People reveal themselves in what they discard," Thalia Monroe replied. Another reason why being the invisible janitor was the perfect cover. A week later, Thalia Monroe was still pushing her mop through the corridors of Fort Kirstson. Her cover was still intact, despite more personnel now knowing who she really was. It had been a strategic decision, serving the ongoing security of the base. The difference was tangible. Officers now nodded respectfully as they passed. Some whispered her true rank. Lieutenant Wexford, now permanently assigned to her intelligence team, occasionally walked beside her, clipboard in hand, learning to observe what others overlooked in plain sight. A new recruit, unaware of recent events, carelessly dropped trash near Thalia Monroe's freshly mopped section. Before Wexford could intervene, another officer quietly corrected the recruit. "That's Commander Monroe," the officer said firmly. "Show some respect." Thalia Monroe continued mopping, a small smile forming on her face as she faded back into her purposeful invisibility. The base continued to function, but with a new understanding. Rank and worth aren't always visible on a uniform. Some of the lessons Fort Kirstson was learning came from the most unexpected teachers. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone else has been trained not to see.